Hello and welcome to another lighting diagram. My name is Trenton Hoshiko, and today we're going to be talking about this still life painting by Pieter Claesz. It's from 1625, and it's a really beautiful still life, and I like it because it's slightly different. While it still has a lot of food and citrus themes to it, it's not all flowers. I think that it's a slightly different subject matter, and there's lots of glass and metal reflections for us to take a look at. Before I go further, if you want to get this Filmmaker Tools template for Draw.io, which is a free and open source diagramming software, you can go to my Patreon. I have it there. It's completely free. You don't even have to join to do the download. If you do want to join, I have both free tiers that notify you when I post new videos, and also paid tiers that start at just $2 that help support these videos and my general cinematography lessons overall. I'm now really aiming to get about 50 people between the paid and free tiers, so if you want to join, I'd love to have you. That Patreon is linked down in the video's description. Thank you to everybody who's already joined over on Patreon. I really appreciate your support. In terms of getting started with Draw.io, if you haven't used it before for lighting diagramming for filmmaking, I have a video linked down in the video's description that will guide you through importing your own reference image, kind of getting started with the Filmmaker's Tools template, and just some overall usage tips. Now, one of the first things that we'll notice when we take a look at this is that the light is coming from the left to the right, which is pretty standard, and that it's not incredibly soft or incredibly hard. It's kind of somewhere in between. We can kind of tell the direction of the light because of the shadows. So you see the spoon right here, and that shadow right underneath it is pointing in this direction. Same thing with like the bread over here. We are getting that left to right direction with the shadow. Now at the same time, some of the shadows are a little shorter, some of the shadows are a little longer, because we can see the shadows go underneath this plate and bend around the edge of the table. The light is coming slightly top down, which also lines up with how this shadow from the spoon looks. So those are just the general ways of taking a look at the shadows, but we can also use these reflections in the actual metal teapot, kettle, pitcher, whatever you might call that. They do show us what looks like a distorted window that's on the left side. And this matches also where we have this lip of the glass and a similar window frame type look being reflected in it. And the same thing for the glass here in the back. Our background is black and the tablecloth is light colored. That creates some overall nice contrast. And this light color probably helps bounce some of the light around just a little bit as well, while the black really sucks the light up and creates a kind of almost ghostly apparition for this wine glass. Now, at the same time, I don't know when this painting was last restored, so this darkness back here might not be intended to be as dark as it is. So, we'll take that with a grain of salt, but I like to replicate these things as they look right now. That's kind of easiest. And also it's a little fun to try to get a lot of darkness behind something. So I'm going to start out by just kind of making a little space right here for us to work with. And I've done still lives in the past, and this is not going to be incredibly different. I just really liked that you could see this kind of motivation of a window in this painting. It's also not incredibly hard or incredibly soft, like I said, being that I think the window is kind of farther away, making it harder, but it's also a pretty large seeming window, making it softer. So you're kind of getting this balance of how the light is actually being shaped by the environment here. There's likely some curtains on that window too. It kind of really depends, and how we build our set can, manipulate those things. Okay, so I'm going to use this little dresser model for the actual table here. Like I said, we're going to have a kind of lighter tablecloth on here. That'll help with some of the stuff, but I'm going to cheat the table away from the wall. And I think that to get this level of darkness, I'm actually going to use a black backdrop. Now this could be duvetine. If you don't have duvetine, you could use a black sheet or something of that sort. Obviously, especially if you're not using duvetine, do be careful about flammability of draped cloth. Duvetine is fire retardant as long as it's maintained properly. So, just be careful, obviously. But in this way, we're going to have a little, still life set up here in our diagram. Obviously, I'm using a plant. It's fine. It's a diagram. But that black backdrop is going to help us make sure that we get to push this as dark as it is. And, I think part of what the skill of this painting is that there are these pieces of glass that are almost invisible. Like I said, they're almost like apparitions in this as they melt into the background. But because they're catching the light so delicately across their edges, you can still see them faintly, almost as outlines. And that's what we want to kind of replicate. So we want the light to be hitting the table, and we want the light to be hitting the glass, but we don't want it hitting the backdrop. So we will cheat the table out away from that wall and that backdrop. It shouldn't matter too much because that's not the point of this image. And then let's place our camera. I think there's some spatial compression here, so we're going to be able to be, reasonably far back away from it. And that helps also sell the cheat of it being away from the wall. I mean, like I said, it's black back there. It's not, you're not going to like really be able to look in there and say, oh, well, that's the wall or that's not the wall. That's not what matters here. What matters is being able to find the balance of the delicacy of that glass as it catches the light versus the background. So now you kind of have two options here. If you actually have a window, you could, light outside the window. I think that's a little bit more work than it's worth for something like this. And, by and large, you could just kind of fake it, really. So what I would do is get a large piece of diffusion that we can maybe even make look like a window. Just, have something to kind of create this square or rectangular shape, maybe something that looks like a little bit of a crossbar. And we're going to put that right about here as if it's a window that's, 10-ish feet away from this table. Now this icon from the Filmmaker's Tools template is designed as a kind of a 4x4 diffusion, but if you want it to really feel like a floor to ceiling or, just a taller window in general, you could actually stack two of these setups on top of each other to get a longer piece of diffusion vertically, almost like the opposite of a 4x4 floppy, for flagging. You could, basically get a 4x8 piece of diffusion. But we're not going to start with that just because we're trying to keep this lower budget. And then we're going to grab our light path, cast this here. Now, what we want is to have the light going across the table, and you can see that it reaches the back of the table at least. We don't know how much further it would actually go. So the goal is to balance the cheating of the table from the background and the wall with how far our light goes before it falls off. So we don't see the corner of the table, so I don't worry about the corner right here. But we do want to make sure that in our frame, we are getting the entirety of the table. A big diffusion piece like this can have a pretty large swath of coverage. So I'm just going to kind of play with this a little bit until we get it to cover the entire table. And you'd have to do the same in real life. So something along those lines. We have it reaching this corner. We don't see the end of the table on this side, so it doesn't really matter. And we have it going all the way here. Now, this could then touch the backdrop. I'm not sure exactly because it depends on what light you're using and any modifiers. The diffusion might, bring that a little bit closer. It might feather off right at the edge of the table, which is kind of my goal here, is we want it to just fall off right past that back edge, because then we don't have the light specifically affecting the backdrop, but we do have it all across the table quite evenly. Now, this then should actually reflect in a, glass or metal pieces like these very similarly to a window. And that's probably technically all you need to pull this off. So if you want this to be really like this though, I do think that having two of these kind of stacked on each other vertically, and probably then two lamps in that same way, would be the ideal setup so that you get the height associated with it. Now, that's also because if you look at the front edge of the table here, it's getting light evenly across the entire thing. It's not like a window that's just high up on the wall. We're having this long rectangle from a larger window. So then really what you would need to do on set here is work with your lamps and work with your diffusion to dial in this exactly. You want the light falling off right past the table. You want to make sure that it's being caught in these actual silvery and reflective glass and, metal objects. And you want to make sure that you're kind of balancing the hardness with the softness. Yes, we're using 4x4 diffusion for this to kind of mimic the window and create this streak like this. But by moving it closer or further away, we can control these shadows a little bit more and how actually hard or soft they are. So, if this is at 10 feet, we're going to have much more of a hard look than if this was right, at the edge of the frame right here. And those shadows do kind of even differ a little bit in terms of how they've been painted. The one behind the bread and the one behind the picture do seem to be harder than the edge of the plate. So, there's some room to play here. And also even, the small extra distance behind the back of the picture and the plate could influence the actual hardness of that shadow. Also, just in terms of reach, having both of these panels is nice as well because you kind of get it to be able to be a little bit top down as well as straight across. You want to make sure you're reaching all the way up to the tips of these objects on the table. It's not so contained. And like I said, this would then need you to move your diffusion, your lamps back and forth just a little bit to really test out and dial in exactly where you want it to be. If your lamps are dimmable, that also really helps. Now, this is not something that is actually represented in this painting, but could be useful in a photographic medium. If you do want a little more light to make sure that you have your proper exposure, I would use a lantern, and I'd probably place it somewhere around here. Not completely on the shadow side, but also not necessarily on the key side. Now, we don't really see that represented in this painting in particular, but it's something that could be very useful when translating this to a photographic medium. Now, that lantern or a space light, depending on what you have and what might be fitting your space that you're shooting in, is there to help bring the light around the side even more so that, the far side of the pie still gets some exposure. The far side of this bread still has some exposure. We actually do see a little tiny bit of a bright spot and then a shadow and then the bright side. So, there is probably some artistic manipulation going on in the painting, and we need to make sure that we get our exposure overall. So having a lantern that is, top down, hanging from the ceiling, very omnidirectional would help with this kind of thing. You might maybe need to then actually put a flag up there with it to help it not cast onto the backdrop, but that really depends on how tight this space is, the power of the lantern, the power of your other lamps, the distance to the diffusion, all that kind of stuff. But this is one way to help just make sure you get a little bit more of a bump in exposure so that everything can be seen clearly while still having that delicate nature. And I will say that erring on the side of hardness over softness is probably the right way to do this, because the harder light will look more shimmery, reflective, and catch better in these glasses, in particular than just really, really ubiquitous soft light. Smaller sources being harder, that's how catch lights work in eyes. And basically we're using this kettle and these glasses as the catch lights of this portrait of this, banquet, basically. The flag and the lantern here are something that's possible, not 100% required. Obviously I don't have them just in line with the camera, but, top down to just really kind of cast all around and fill in some of this. And the shadows aren't incredibly dark, so that's one other reason why I bring that in as a possibility as well. With a setup like this, you could go a little bit more low budget. You could even, do it as such where you take away the extra lamps if you really just want a similar feeling, but you don't have to recreate it all in particular. This is a good option. Now over here, we have a little bit more money and a little bit more effort put into it, but you are having the benefit of the more rectangular shaped diffusion source. You're having 2 lamps, and then you're having this fill on the other side. So both of these are reasonable ways to achieve this type of look. And really, when you're trying to emulate this kind of thing, the focus is on catching the light in the glass and in the metal, making sure that it falls off before it goes to the backdrop, so you get that really nice contrast and that really just subtle, ethereal, apparition level, almost invisible aspect to the glass. And so that wraps us up for today. Thank you so much for watching. As I said at the beginning, if you want to get my Filmmaker Tools template, it's available on my Patreon. That's linked down below. It's completely free. I just want to help people out with being able to diagram for their own films. If you want to get the kinds of tools that we've talked about today for your own production kit, I have affiliate links down in the video description. Those help support this channel. And if you want to support directly, I also have that Patreon linked down below as well. If you like this kind of video, please give it a like to help me with the YouTube algorithm and reaching other people who like these kinds of cinematography and lighting analysis type videos, as well as discussion about how to lighting diagram and create pre-production materials in this manner. If you want to see more, you can subscribe for upcoming videos about tools and techniques for cinematography, lighting, and micro-budget filmmaking in general. I have a lot more videos coming out, including some DIY builds that I'm really excited to put out there. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a wonderful week ahead of you. Take care of yourselves, take care of people around you, tell somebody that you care about them, and overall, I hope that you have a great day.